Hello and welcome to WinMagic Speed webinar on defeating encryption lock-in. I'm Melissa with WinMagic and I will cover some logistics before we begin. We will be recording today's webinar and the link will be shared with you in our post-webinar email. The presentation will run for about 20 minutes followed by a Q&A session for 10 minutes. We encourage you to leave your questions in the Q&A box. Once the webinar ends, a new window with a brief survey will open up asking you for feedback about our webinar today. Please take a moment of your time to fill this in. We will be running some polls throughout the course of the webinar and we encourage your participation. We thank Rahul Kumar, our VP of Sales and Marketing, for joining us today to moderate today's webinar and introduce our speakers for the session. I will now turn this over to Rahul.
Thanks, Melissa. Thank you, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, wherever you guys are on the East Coast and West Coast. I hope you guys had a lot of us had a major snowstorm through the 25 states in the US and where we are in Canada. So I'm hoping that all of you guys are safe, keeping secure and taking care of the snow, especially the people in Texas. It's something new for you guys. Anyways, let's jump in. Thank you for joining in. We appreciate you taking this time and talking to us, willing to listen to us on transitioning of your encryption provider. And that can be a very painful one because it's such a tricky and sticky technology. We believe there is a better world, and we have seen and demonstrated that through our partnership with Image. And today we'll be spending the next 20 odd minutes talking about that. What are the benefits that our customers see? That's the major reason we bring this particular webinar to you. Let me jump in quick and introduce our speakers here. We have Gary McCracken. Gary is the CISO at WinMagic, as well as VP of Technologies. He's a CISSP with significant experience in the IT security world. He has been responsible for helping us at WinMagic develop our full disk encryption and authentication software. More recently, he has been very focused on forming partnerships with technology providers and technology collaborators across the marketplace. Gary also represents us at industry security organizations, including Trusted Computing Group and the FIDO Alliance. Welcome, Gary, and thank you for joining us. We also have Kyle Harrelson. Kyle is the founder and chief executive officer at Swimage. Swimage is the Windows migration and PC lifecycle software solution. And Kyle has been in the industry and serving in the Windows migration and PC automation field for over 25 years. Well, let the two of them get on with this conversation and talk to you guys more about what this entails, what are the challenges that the market faces, and how do we propose a solution here. Gary, you want to go next and talk to us about the situation there? What is the situation in the marketplace?
Well, thanks, Rahul. So, first of all, just a little recap what we're talking about here today. If your current encryption solution and technology is not working for you, or you're feeling being overcharged, or you're being held hostage because you feel it's just too expensive, too hard, too much time to switch to a modern solution, well, today's speed webinar is for you. But well, let's start out and I think we have a poll to start with. Let's just find out where people are with their current encryption solutions. Melissa, can you kick the poll off? Here we go. We have 30 seconds. So what's the biggest challenge posed by your current encryption technology? And we give 4 potential choices there. Poor security, maintenance and unforeseen expenses, complex manageability, or current vendor not focused on the technology or the business. And the answer should come up. Yeah. Okay, the big one is complex manageability. at 60%, and the second one comes in at 40% is the current vendors is not focused on the technology or the business anymore. As we know, some players are actually getting out of the business or not focusing on the same segments of customers they have in the past. So let's go to the next slide and delve into some of these reasons a little bit more. Some of the reasons why some enterprises are finding themselves in uncomfortable situations. Well, I mean, I think they could rank into 3 or 4 different categories. Security and compliance. I always think of security compliance first, probably because of my security background. But are the auditors saying you're not compliant, or that you need to have more sophistication like pre-boot authentication or CAC card authentication at pre-boot, or you're vulnerable for a data breach, or maybe you've had a data breach, or maybe you just don't trust the product anymore because it's no longer their focus. That's one potential. Next. Or maybe it's monetary, the expense. Are the maintenance fees just too expensive? Is there price escalation, or is the cost of support going up? And maybe that's just because your existing vendor doesn't really want to be in this game anymore. Or, we go to the next slide. Is it manageability? Maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, you were 100% Windows shop and you had a pretty simple situation. But now, for instance, maybe you've got more Mac, and we see a lot of uptake on Linux, even on laptops now. So do you need multi-platform support? And your current solution may only be doing Windows. And then even if it's doing Windows, what about key storage and key recovery, or client status, or lack of reporting? These are all reasons we've heard of people wanting to move. Reporting is very important, especially if you lose or have a laptop stolen. You have to have enough reporting, enough audit logging to be able to prove to the auditor that it was encrypted, so you don't have to do breach notification. So these are some of the situations that we're finding that the customers are finding themselves in now with being locked into their old encryption system. We go to the next slide, and we're going to do another quick poll. And Melissa, if you could bring that one up for us. So why aren't you switching? If you're one of this situation, what is your worst fear stopping you from switching to a modern encryption solution? We'll give you 30 seconds here. It could be data breach. It could be the risk of switching, or the cost, the user experience, complex procedures, or maybe downtime, maybe your fear. And the answer is complex procedures. It comes in at 43%. That's the biggest one. That's interesting. It can be very complex to move from one encryption system to the other. Kyle's going to run us through that. I couldn't see the rest, but why don't you turn this over to Kyle to go through what some of the complications are switching from one encryption solution to the other. Kyle?
Absolutely. Thanks, Gary. So what I'm going to go through is I'll talk about a little bit of the complications that we've seen in moving to new encryption technology. And it's really these complications that make it very challenging to move to new encryption. That's why you end up living with encryption that really isn't meeting your needs for way longer than you really should or need to. First off is the risk. There is risk associated with this kind of transition. There's risk of data breach, because at some point during an encryption conversion process, that old encryption needs to be removed. So when you remove that old encryption, that data becomes vulnerable at that point until you can re-encrypt that drive. So that is a big concern for a lot of companies that are dealing with primarily compliance and big data risk issues, that they don't want to have that breach in their environment. There's also data loss. Because you're touching the entire drive, there could be a situation where something goes wrong, a user or a technician makes a mistake and actually wipes the entire drive. That could be pretty critical as well, and very expensive. The other couple of things are unrecoverable errors and OS and boot failures. If something does happen as a glitch in the removal process of your old encryption, you could end up with boot failures and you won't be able to get back to the drive. or you'll get a system that's partially functional or blue screening periodically. You get all kinds of issues with that may be unrecoverable. So there is a lot of risk associated with doing this kind of process. Next is really the resource cost. This is a big complication when it comes to your budget. You have to provide project management, desk site technicians, because you're going to need to send out folks that are going to touch machines, and you're going to have back-end support to resolve any issues going on. And that can be very expensive depending on the time it takes to do this kind of conversion. It could be a year, a couple of years in some cases that we've seen, and it can become very expensive as you're dragging this out for those resources for the duration of this project. Next to the user experience. The user experience is something that many times gets ignored, but is also very critical when doing this kind of conversion. You don't want to interrupt productivity, especially if you have users that are sales driven and really drawing to the bottom line of your organization. You don't want to interrupt their productivity. And if you take them out by doing an encryption conversion process for a couple of days, sometimes I've seen where you ship PCs back and forth from some depot center to do this process, they could be down for a week. And that's something you really don't want to do to take your system down that way. There's also very complex procedures doing that. You may sometimes have the users have to go through a series of checklists and things to ship PCs or to run some commands on their machines to take care of this. And that could be problematic for the users. And if they are sales-driven users, you could end up losing revenue, especially if you end up with data loss in some situations. Okay, then there's time and expense. When you do the calculation of how many machines you have, divide how many techs you have and how many they can do per day, and there's a limit to that. And then based on how many techs you want to hire to do this process, if you're touching machines, it could get very expensive and time consuming to go through all your systems. And especially if you're dealing with remote workers, you've got a remote workforce, how do you handle those? Are you going to ship PCs back and forth to take care of this? Then your shipping cost is going to go way up. And also if you have a very distributed organization, maybe you have a lot of smaller offices, reaching those endpoints is going to be very challenging for you. So those are in aggregate a very complex means of getting moved from one encryption to the other, and it really prevents companies from moving as quickly as they really should or need to. Okay, so WinMagic and Swimage is joined forces, and we provided a solution that really solves these main complexity issues moving from the old encryption to a more modern encryption technology. So we went through and we identified all these issues and how do we solve those? First is the automation piece of it. We really focused on getting this fully automated, so there's really little or to no touch time, so no interaction required by any technicians other than targeting, scheduling, and pushing it out. So it's a process that can be executed through SCCM package. It can be done through Active Directory group policies, or it can be user initiated. So you allow the users to pick their time when they want to start the process, and they start it going and it finishes, in a matter of hours without having to interact or touch the system at all. So users can start it at the end of their day, and by the time they need to start working, get on the machine, it's completely finished. Handles all reboots and the entire process end to end, making sure it goes from one encryption to the other. During this process, also part of being fully automated, you want to get real-time reporting. So it does report up exactly what step it's on. If it's having issues, it has to retry. All that information gets fed up to a central level reporting console that technicians can look at to make sure that things are going smoothly and that there's nothing that they need to do to interact with these machines remotely to make sure that they're going smoothly. Next is a big deal is the security piece of this. We wanted to make sure that if you are high security and compliance related sort of organization, we didn't want to leave any bit of data on the machines insecure, vulnerable type of breach, especially if you're doing it remotely. We don't necessarily have technicians that have control over machines. So we wanted to be able to make sure that security remains intact. So what we've done is we've added a couple of pieces to this. First off, being multi-layer encryption. So before the old encryption gets removed, we layer second level encryption on top of that so that at no point during the entire process is any single file exposed in an unencrypted state. The next thing is we lock the system during the conversion. So during the process, no one can interact with it unless it's a technician that needs to log into the system remotely. Could they interrupt the process or hack it in any way? So that's something we wanted to make sure that we included in this process, was high level of security. Next, we needed to minimize the expense. So we minimize the number of techs hours. Techs can now do many machines per tech per day, up to 200-300 we've seen in some cases doing this process. So it really does accelerate the conversion because fewer people are needed, fewer project managers are needed as well, and those costs can go way down on the expense side. Also, the user experience, we wanted a high level of user experience by minimizing the interruptions. So they really don't have to do much other than just get it scheduled, kick it off. Then it goes through the entire process. It can handle reboots, fully automated. They just sit back and watch, or they do something else while the PC is being converted. It can be done completed after hours, so they don't have to interrupt their business cycle. And then it can be completed without even touching the device, being pushed out through remote execution, SECM, or Active Directory, any other tool that can do remote execution. Next is minimizing the risk. We built in the process resiliency, so every step along the way, it does a check and it does a fix of any issues it finds. And if it finds any issues, it remediates the issue and picks up where it left off, and at no level does it have to start over again. So it's a kind of a brute force mechanism to go through the sequence of tasks it needs to go through to make sure it goes from one stage to another with really no errors in between. If it does find an error, we built a lot of resiliency to auto repair. So if it needs to reboot, do a repair, or back up a step and then retry it again, it can do that as well. So those are the items we've done to really solve this problem and make it from a very expensive, complex, time-consuming process down to you set it up, go, you run the project, and in a very short order, you can get this thing completed. We have a couple of customer experiences that we've gone through. I want to talk about what they've done. One is a healthcare business. They have 40,000 machines they needed to convert. They did this all under a year. They were doing it roughly about 3,000 a month. And they had a driving factor of security cost, and they needed to have a level of standard across the board for a certain type of encryption. So they needed to take care of this entire process. And so they used Swimage to take care of their encryption conversion. It took about 1 hour and 10 minutes on average per system, and they were doing several hundred a day with this process with very few technicians. Next customer is in the financial industry. Again, high compliance kind of industry, and they're very large, 350,000 PCs to convert. They're still in ramp-up phase right now. But that's going very well. Their driving factor for doing this was security, cost, reliability, functionality, just to get from one to another, and really focused on increasing security and reducing that cost. Their average time of migration is 2 hours and 15 minutes. I wouldn't focus too much time on the average time because it is fully automated. If it can be done after hours, whether it takes 1 hour, 2 hours, or 4 hours, as long as it's done overnight, it really doesn't make a difference because the user logs in and they really don't know anything's changed. They just continue doing their business. Okay, so the results of the process, PCs switched in record time because you can accelerate the cycle with fewer technicians, fewer managers, and you can just schedule it and go. It focuses on the technology, resiliency, making sure PCs are converted properly. All data does remain secure because we have that double layer of encryption that goes through and the lock mechanism to make sure nothing can be interrupted during the process. You can do this all with minimal staff. You do have happy users because it doesn't interrupt their day. They can kick it off after hours, and it really doesn't require really any user interaction to make this thing happen. It is a better overall solution. So you've now migrated from your less satisfied encryption technology to a more modern solution, which is going to get you into a better place, and overall a reduction in cost.
Thanks.
Okay, back to you, Raul.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate that. Let me just quickly look up the chat box and let's see if we have some questions. Guys, please feel free to put in your questions while we take some of the first ones. Okay, so let me take the first one. Which all encryption service provider, encryption vendors can we rip and replace? Kyle, you want to take that?
Yeah, the encryption providers really are all the major ones we can handle. Even if it's one that's a little more obscure, as long as we have a mechanism to automatically do the uninstall and decrypt, we can take care of those, and we would work with you to make sure that happens. But all the major ones we absolutely can handle.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. And I think even before this question, we had a quick poll, Melissa. Do you want to pull that poll up, which was very relevant to this particular question? Yeah. In our upcoming, as one of the next steps here, we will be doing a webinar on March 2nd to do a demo of this particular solution on how it works, as Kyle mentioned. So in this upcoming demo, would you prefer any particular system? Would you to convert from? Please feel free to put in your choice, and we'll try our best to take the one which has the highest vote up there. Okay, do we have the results? Okay, so so we have a vehement, overwhelming response of Symantec here. So we will try and use that as our and it's up to Kyle to really showcase that, but that's the one that came up as the vast majority. Okay, thanks for that. Appreciate your response to the poll. Let me take the second one here. Our encryption provider has gone out of market. How can you help us? Kyle, you want to take that one again?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because that's a common problem. Now you're dealing with encryption that's not even supported anymore. And yes, we absolutely can help with that. We have historically worked with those kind of companies in the past, and when we can do the exact same process, we will gracefully remove the old encryption and migrate to the new one just as easily. So whether or not it's in business or out of business, we can handle that.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. Okay, let me take a third one, and this is an interesting question. So it says that this sounds good. What's the catch? Gary, you want to take that? Here?
Okay. Well, there really isn't any catch here. I know that, as we said, there's been apprehension about switching for all the reasons that basically Swimage and Winmatic have addressed with this automated conversion process. But our experience, I think, has shown that the cost and time to switch is just a fraction of what can be saved on an ongoing basis. And I guess what we're going to do is encourage you to engage with us to work out an ROI calculation for your particular situation and see what you could be saving.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thanks. I hope that answers that particular question for us. Let me just look up if there is another one there. Okay, so let me take up another one. It says, is there a standard solution, or does this require a larger platform decision or purchase?
It's a standalone solution.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not required to have another platform to use us.
Okay. Hope that answers that particular question. Okay. We don't have any further question at this particular time. We still have 6 more minutes, but unless we have any more questions coming in from the audience, we will go ahead and close this webinar. But remember, we'll have a conversion demo on March 2nd, and you'll get an invite for this shortly. Do sign in and or let us know your questions, like Gary mentioned, and we're happy to do a specific discussion with you guys. Thank you and have a good evening, good afternoon, good morning.
Thank you, Rahul.
Thank you.